This screencast is a very quick review of the analytical tools built over the APC aggregation produced by the Jisc Monitor project using the data from the Jisc TCO project. There are 4 reports, 2 of them quite detailed, getting into the meat of the APC data, and 2 of them demonstrating the value of connecting the APC data out to other data sets, in this case the DOHA and Sherpa. So our first big report is the report on the expenditure statistics by publisher. This gives you an idea of the numbers of APCs paid for by institutions in the UK to each publisher. So in the main panel here, for example, you see the top 10 publishers by number of APCs. No surprises to see publishers like Elsevier and Wiley near the top there. You also get to see their total expenditure, so we can see, for example, that 1.8 million or thereabouts was spent on Elsevier throughout the entire data set. And we can also see the minimum, maximum, mean amounts spent on each publisher. So, for example, Taylor and Francis here, the smallest APC we know about is £525, the largest just over £2,000, with an average of around about £1,500. Now, there are a number of ways that we can cut this data up to get more into the details that we're interested in. First of all, the data that you look at by default is across all time, so we may want to constrain the time period that we're looking at, and there are 3 different ways we can do that, either by looking at the date that the APC was paid, the date that the APC was applied for, or the publication date of the article. The most likely to be useful is the date APC paid, so let's suppose we want to look at everything for January 2014 through to January 2015. So this is everything that was paid for in 2014 now in the graph there. We may also be interested in looking at which institutions spent what on each of these publishers. So down here we can see a list of the institutions that are in the data set, and we can pick on, say, UCL here, who have around about 3,500 APCs paid in 2014. So if we select that, we can see the spread of publishers that UCL paid their money out to. Now, suppose we've got a publisher that we're interested in that doesn't appear in this top 10 list, which is entirely possible. We can choose specifically which publishers to look at over here. So we could look at, for example, the Nature Publishing Group and IEEE, and we will see those 2 publishers compared with each other. And if we want to see how they fit alongside, say, Elsevier, we can bring Elsevier again as well. So that shows you clearly why Nature Publishing Group and IEEE weren't in the top 10 for UCL in 2014. And again, with this reduced data set, we can now look at the total expenditure. So although Nature Publishing Group, there are fewer APCs, we'll see that overall they're perhaps more expensive, and we can look at the minimum, maximum, mean for each of these publishers as well. Now, the flip side of this report is the institution report. This is expenditure by institution, so we can look at how many APCs have been paid by institutions, and we can break that down again by date and by publisher and so forth. So we'll see that our top 10 institutions, UCL being a clear first in this particular data set, mostly because of the Jisc TCO project's data set. The UCL have provided a lot of information. We can see the total expenditure and the minimum, maximum and mean. So for example, we can see that Imperial College, the lowest APC they've ever paid is £205, the highest is just over £4,000, and on average Imperial College pay about £1,800 for their APCs. And once again, we can limit these by date range, so let's stick with our 2014 time period. This is the data across 2014, and now we can also look at breaking that down by specific publisher. So let's see on Elsevier who spent what. So again, as usual, UCL appearing at the top there. These are the numbers of APCs paid to Elsevier by each of the publishers, and we can also look at the total expenditure. So there's something potentially interesting going on here, in that University of Bristol and Imperial College London tend to pay more for their APCs than the University of Birmingham, and we can see that reflected here. And once again, if we're interested in specific institutions, we can enter them here. So obviously we can use UCL, and if we type university, we can pick a couple of universities from here. So there's UCL versus Durham, for example. So these two reports really allow us to cut up the actual APCs paid by institution and by publisher, and to see who's paying what, and what the average is for both publishers and for institutions. The other reports that we've got are a report on the open access versus hybrid publication. This tells us how many of the APCs were published in pure open access journals. If APCs were for articles that were published in pure open access journals versus articles that were published in hybrid journals. The interest being how much money is actually spent on these hybrid journals versus how much money is spent on pure OA. And as we can see here, open access is the light blue and the hybrids is the grey. A lot more money and a lot more publications go into hybrid journals than go into pure open access journals. And once again, we can break that down by institution. So if we say, for example, look at the University of Bristol, we can see how their expenditure on OA versus hybrid goes. And of course, again, we can limit by the date, so we can look at 2014. See how that data set looks. This data has been acquired by connecting to the DOAJ and finding out if the ISSNs associated with a article appear in the DOAJ. The DOAJ being only for pure OA journals. So if an article appears in the DOAJ, if a journal appears in the DOAJ, then it's a pure OA publication. If it doesn't, it's a hybrid publication. We've done a similar kind of analysis for this gold versus green statistic. We have, of the 8,600 odd APCs, got enough data to query around about 5,000 of them in Sherpa Fact, which is done by passing the journal that the publication took place in and the funder who funded the work, and asking Sherpa Fact, were there any green publication options for this combination of journal and publisher? Journal and funder. And then if there was an option, recording that here. So this is the total number of APCs in the system. This is the total number of those articles for which a green publication route was available, the number for which there was no green route available, and the long tail here of ones where it was not totally clear from the publisher's policy whether a green option would have been available. This doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that people should have published green, but it's an interesting notion as to what percentage of articles that were paid for could theoretically have been published green rather than gold.